Welcome to the Animal Wellness Podcast, all about improving the lives of animals with better policies and practices in government and business. Brought to you by Animal Wellness Action, where we believe helping animals helps us all. Here's your host, Joseph Grove.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Animal Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Joseph Grove. I have to admit, I wasn't one of the folks who followed the story of Flaco the owl. In February 23, Flaco, a majestic Eurasian eagle owl, which is, I think, the largest species of owls, made headlines after escaping the Central Park Zoo when vandals damaged his enclosure. Born in captivity and confined for over 13 years, few expected the owl to survive in the wild. But Flaco defied the odds, becoming a symbol of resilience and freedom as he soared over Manhattan, hunting rats, perching on high-rises, and even committing the occasional act of peeping Tom, a little voyeurism. There are videos out there of this owl looking in people's windows that would have freaked me out, but I don't know. He's an owl, and I guess that's what he did. His deep hoots echoed through the city, drawing nightly crowds and sparking a social media frenzy. Flaco's remarkable year in the wild made him a local legend and New York's first true celebrity owl. But his story ended in heartbreak in February 24, a year later, when he died after striking a building, a tragedy compounded by exposure to rat poison and avian disease. His death triggered public mourning, renewed calls for wildlife-safe urban policies, and a citywide reflection on the human impact on nature. Today, we're talking to Christine Mott. She is the author of the new children's book, Freebird, Flaco the Owl's Dreams Take Flight, which was illustrated by Afra Layla Isler, and it'll be released on May 6th, so just a couple of weeks from the time we're recording this show. The book is aimed at readers ages 4 to 8 who will learn the importance of following their dreams and showing compassion for wild animals. As an additional incentive to check it out, half of the proceeds will be donated to the Wild Bird Fund, a 501c3 that rehabilitates sick, injured, and orphaned wildlife and releases the animals back into the wilds of New York City. Christine is a seasoned attorney, animal protection advocate, and corporate ethics specialist whose work spans global law firms, nonprofit leadership, and academic research. She writes compellingly on corporate accountability, legal reform, and the intersection of business and animal welfare, offering thought-provoking insight into how policy can drive compassionate change. She is a former chair of the Animal Law Committee of the New York City Bar Association and has served on the boards of various animal advocacy organizations. So, Christine, thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me and for that wonderful introduction. I am thrilled to be at the point where I am singing the praises of Flaco and really celebrating his legacy. He was such a charismatic and amazing local legend, as you say, that really has touched the hearts of so many people. And it's been an honor to try to memorialize him and his legacy in this children's book.
Right. And I said Flaco, you're saying Flaco. So I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's a Spanish word. I looked it up, but I can't recall what it means now. But it is a
skinny. I think it means skinny in Spanish.
That's why I've never heard it. That's why I've never heard that word. No one has ever looked at, oh, Joe, he's Flaco. No one's ever said that, so it's unfamiliar to me. Well, let me ask you this, because certainly you're right that the story caught on, right? And really, I do recall hearing like late night comedians making references to the bird and you know, coming up headlines on the news. Why did this story take such root in the national consciousness?
Well, you're right. It's unusual that I think an owl, a little owl who spent his whole life in a zoo, who frankly was not one of the megafauna, as they say, in the zoos that was a main attraction at the Central Park Zoo. It was only after he became free that he became this charismatic megafauna that everybody knew about. And I think it's because he really demonstrated so clearly two things. One, that we as people and animals have shared experiences in life, and, you know, hopes and dreams. Those are things that we know in our own reality as humans, but so clearly exist in the animal kingdom. everyone can identify with the dream to be free, to follow your dreams, how difficult it can be, but you have to persevere. So here was Flaco. He was born in captivity in a hatchery in North Carolina. And as a chick, he was shipped to the Central Park Zoo, where he spent his whole life in a small enclosure. It was estimated to be about the size of a bus stop, for reference. And Flaco was a Eurasian eagle owl, which is the largest species of owl in the world. They have a wingspan of over 6 feet wide, just larger and taller than your average adult human. And in his enclosure, he never even had the opportunity to fly. So if you just let that sink in for a moment, this is a true underdog story where he had to patiently wait as his life passed by. He could see wild birds, pigeons, sparrows, seagulls flying by. Of course, he could see other animals that were stuck in their enclosures. And for all those 12 years until late one night when someone came and cut a hole in his enclosure, he, despite having lived his whole life in this little box, not having the ability or knowledge how to fly, crawled out, spread his wings, and flew away. And pretty soon after his escape, there were some pretty aggressive efforts to recapture him by the zoo. There was some thought that because of his captivity, he wouldn't know how to protect himself. He would suffer or maybe crash into a car. Who knows what could happen to him? But amazingly, he really defied the odds. He taught himself to fly and taught himself to hunt. And for the first time, he was able to engage in these natural behaviors. So I think for people looking on, it was just, who doesn't want to root for the little guy, the underdog, who, despite all the odds against him, is able to follow his dreams.
Isn't it fascinating that inside this animal, which, to your point, never had an opportunity to explore his latent abilities, was able to tap into them nonetheless? It makes me wonder, we as people in the face of adversity, if we sell ourselves short in what we're capable of doing. And I suppose that's part of the message of the book, right? Because you're very declarative in your recommendations for readers, right? To believe in yourself, to follow your dreams, and dreams take a plan. And I find that to be a touching part of the story, is that, hey, maybe if I had to, I could go out and learn to hunt rats too.
Sure. I think within us all, there is a drive to follow our dreams. Well, everybody has a dream, whether it's big or small. And Flaco really was such a great example of that. And I think that's why people could connect with him. He became a celebrity. There were people that would follow his every move. Bird watchers would, say, "I saw Flaco in his favorite tree." He just really became this symbol of hope and inspiration for so many people. And sadly, as you mentioned, he enjoyed his year of freedom, the first time in his life to go be an owl, which was just amazing. And sadly, he passed away where, in the wilds of New York, as we say, he had many challenges that he had to deal with. And of course, he passed away when he crashed into a high-rise building. Contributing factor was the fact that he had preyed on, rats and pigeons that had consumed poison that ended up in Flaco's system. I think so much, both for children and being able to follow his stories and inspiration, but also for adults to be able to see the impact of something that we may consider to be the status quo. I think it kind of shook up everybody and said, well, hey, Flaco made a choice. He made a choice when he was able to leave the zoo. The zoo wanted to get him back. He didn't want to go back. I think it begs the question of all of us. What was the right place for Flaco as a wild owl? Did he belong in the zoo? Was a better place for him living free? And of course, New York City is not the natural habitat of Eurasian eagle owl. They're native to Eastern Europe, but certainly the opportunity, even if it was cut short by some of the natural challenges of the city, in my opinion, and I think Flaco expressed his opinion, was far better than living a solitary life in captivity in an unnatural enclosure.
I mentioned to you before we started that I read the book to our 7-year-old last night, and he glommed on to that notion of captivity. And we didn't go quite this far with it, but the topic generally speaks to the concept of zoos as a philosophically abhorrent or meritorious institution. And I think the question that was on his mind in his 7-year-old way was whether it is better to live a short time in freedom or a longer time, a safer time in captivity. In the wild Eurasian eagle owls live about 20 years in captivity. They can live up to 60. So it was no small sacrifice of longevity that he made unknowingly, Flaco, when he took to the wild air of New York City. And that's when I talk to people about zoos is, yes, one argument is the animals are safer there. They live longer, right? They're not predated upon. But the cost for that is pretty high. And I say to these people, and I know I'm doing a monologue rather than a dialogue, but I say to these people, well, your child would be much safer if you kept that child in a cage in your house and never let that child drive a car or go on dates or go to the workplace. But that's not what we want for our children. And I would contend, and perhaps you would agree, and this is my way of finally letting you weigh back in, I would contend that's not the way anyone wants to live.
Absolutely. And, I think that's at the most basic, that's one of the points I hope to express in this book is the ability for children and everyone to identify with the feelings and emotions of animals because they have them so clearly. I know many times humans like to differentiate themselves among the animal kingdom. We're smarter, we're stronger, we can do all these things. And we forget some of the most basic things that we do share with our animal brethren. And that is feelings. Of course, animals can feel pain, happiness, suffering. And so, yes, if you look at the story of Flaco as an individual, I think it's a great comparison that your son made. If you were Flaco, what would you want? Would you want to be able to live your life as a real owl or to be in this small space? And, we can talk about that ourselves, hypothetically, but Flaco didn't have the choice. The choice was made for him that he was bred in captivity and meant to stay in captivity. Some could argue for conservation purposes, although the Eurasian eagle owl is not known to be a threatened or endangered species. So some might argue that his captivity was perhaps more for entertainment reasons than necessarily for conservation purposes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you look at these zoos, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, and I hope you'll please finish your thought. But right, so much of the argument of conservation to me is BS. Quick parenthetical. We are sponsored by Animal Wellness Action, which is a nonprofit that does a lot of advocacy for animals in DC, and we do not have a position against zoos. So I'm speaking really, for myself. But I find them really to exist more for, selling plushed animals and cotton candy and being a great place for, people to take the kids on a day when they're bored, more so than I really buy into any of the conservation arguments to which you just alluded.
I absolutely would agree with that. I think, there are so many examples of animals that are in captivity that didn't have that opportunity, like Flaco, that engage in these repetitive behaviors that scientifically are explained by the fact that they've been driven mad by captivity. These are animals, if you take elephants, pandas, even a bird like Flaco, in their natural habitat, these are animals that would expand miles and miles every day as part of their natural territory. They would have significant and well-developed social structures of other animals. And so to reduce their lives to these very simplistic enclosures where they really do not have the opportunity to engage in any natural behaviors. It would drive anyone mad. They're not being predated upon. They're not, hunters poaching them. They don't have to deal with those things, but there's a whole host of other things that they are dealing with and we should care about. And I believe that those factors really need to be taken into consideration when we say, well, zoos are here for conservation purposes. If you look at the budgets of most zoos, even if they're run as, quote unquote, nonprofits, a very small percentage of funding ever actually goes to real tried and true conservation activities. Most of it is upkeep of the zoo, entertainment qualities of it. I mean, if you just look at the sheer size of parking areas compared to the size of enclosures for the animals, I think that says so much. And there are other models that I personally would love to see zoos maybe expand and have be the next generation of zoos. And that's guiding more towards a sanctuary model where really the goal is to help animals. And there certainly are animals that are meant to be wild, but for whatever reason, they're injured, they had been orphaned, they simply cannot be released into the wild. That would be a safe sanctuary for them. And the goal of that place would be to provide a safe home for these animals. There could be an educational component to it, but education and entertainment should not be the first and foremost purpose, which seems to be the case with zoos.
You're listening to the Animal Wellness Podcast. We'll be right back after this quick word from our sponsor.
This is Wayne Pacelli with Animal Wellness Action. We depend on countless people like you to support our fight for animals. Join us today by donating to further our campaigns to spare countless animals from cruel and needless pharmaceutical tests, put an end to animal fighting, liberate farm animals from extreme confinement, and so many others. Become a donor at any amount. Visit animalwellnessaction.org/donate to join our fight against animal cruelty of all kinds. That's animalwellnessaction.org/donate. Thank you.
Now, back to the Animal Wellness Podcast.
Flaco's story, it unfolds. How did you get the idea to convert it into a children's book and talk about the process by which you did?
Well, I followed Flaco's story. I was one of the people cheering him on as he escaped and just enjoyed watching his adventures throughout the city. I'm from New York, so it was especially a wonderful story. And I know there's such a wonderful, vibrant animal rights community there. I remember telling my two daughters, I have a 3-year-old and now 7-year-old, about Flaco's exploits, and they just thought it was so interesting. And of course, then when Flaco sadly passed away, I remember also explaining that to my girls. And it was such a bittersweet moment when Flaco passed. It was so sad that his life had come to an end, but you also felt like a moment to celebrate and that he did have that opportunity to be free. And maybe even more so, what really struck me was just the public support that I saw of people who may not on a regular basis identify as animal rights advocates or somebody that's anti-zoo, making the connection that Flaco, as a wild owl, was able to live his best life being free and not in the zoo. And to me, I just didn't want Flaco's story to end there. I felt it had to be made into a book. And as a mom of little kids and a longtime animal rights person, I really, I think there's such untapped value in children's books because it's an opportunity to speak to really the next generation. And I thought this was a wonderful opportunity because Flaco, in a lot of ways, is a great ambassador for other wild animals in captivity. And he was so charismatic and everybody knew and loved him. It was a great way to create a cute story that would engage kids, but that had this message in it that I hope will carry through and plant really a seed of compassion for animals.
when I got the book and you'd sent me an electronic copy, I went through it rather quickly, and I didn't pick up in the book as I went through it an indicator that the story had a sudden, if not tragic, ending. But as my 7-year-old was going through it, he came across the page where your illustrator depicts Flaco flying, upward with a halo around, and he picked up, kind of right away, that by the time we're reading this story, Flaco, has died. Was that a hard part of this narrative for you to deal with in the authorial process?
Yes, I mean, look, we're dealing with children, and we're dealing with a subject that involves life and death and some other hard topics that kids might not deal with every day. So the challenge for me was to be able to create a book that kids would want to read, would be attractive and compelling, and tell the story in a way they can understand, and also would leave them feeling uplifted rather than sad or scared. I've seen in other books that are trying to promote a message of humane treatment of animals, and sometimes it can be really tricky to achieve that balance of sharing the message but not hitting the reader over the head and scaring them so much that they don't even want to engage with the book. So I did want to treat Flaco's death in a way that was very gentle and show the positive aspects of his legacy and his life, rather than focusing on things that, again, might be too sad or scary for children.
I think you hit that one out of the park based on my youngsters' reading of the book. I shared with you too that we read it last night, and then he asked to take it on the drive to school this morning. And on the drive, at a time when normally he's clamoring to be on the phone or for me to play the latest SCP or Italian brain rot song, he wanted to look at the book. So we brought it along, and on the way to school, he read that book to me cover to cover. And I tell you, that was so uplifting for me to know that this book had engaged him, that you had told a story that was captivating, and one a 7-year-old felt some connection with. So this reviewer says 5 stars.
Well, wow. Thank you. I mean, that means so much to me. I thank you, and thank your son. In
fact, let me just interrupt you there, because I want to ask Ryan, because I recorded some conversation with Everett about the book, and let's play that, Ryan. I want listeners to hear some of the things he said. Everett, thank you for reading the book about Flaco the owl with me. And you and I read it last night, and I'm wondering if you would read a page to me now.
Okay. Have you ever had a dream so big, so crazy, so amazing that you felt like it never came true? I'm like Flaco the owl. I know all about big dreams. Mine were as big as the sky. After this is your New York, the city of dreams.
Very good, Everett. It's all about dreams.
For an old owl like me, it's been quite a fun ride. Looking back at my own, some people say I should have stayed at the zoo. Well, if you were me, what would you do? My days of freedom and adventures have been the best times of my life.
All right. Excellent.
Even now, my spirit is still like free, and I'll never even stop.
So let me ask you this, Everett. If you were Flaco, would you rather have stayed at the zoo and lived maybe safely and longer, or would you rather have been free?
Be free and eat so much food that I'll get fat.
Would you recommend this book to other children your age to read?
I need to tell you something.
What do you need to tell me?
My lizard, named Mr. Lizard, turned into David the Cheese Wizard.
So Mr. Lizard became David the Cheese Wizard. All right, let me ask you the serious question, though, okay? Because I need it for the show. I'll ask it again. You've read the book, and I know you wanted to read it on the way to school with me this morning. Would you recommend this book to your friends, or maybe like
Friends and family.
friends and family? All right, everyone. Well, that's been Everett with our first ever podcast book review. All right, thanks, Ryan. Christine, I interrupted you before we went to that break.
No, I'm so thrilled to be able to hear the reactions of, real life children. It's hard as an author trying to write something. You hear it in your head, you can read it to your kids, and you never know how it's going to land. So that makes me so happy that the story was so well received by your son, and I hope so many other children will feel the same way. I think we touched a little bit about the power of children's books, but really, with children's books or any form of animal advocacy, there are so many avenues to reach change. And as a lawyer, I've dealt with on the policy level, bills on a local, state, federal level. But to me, what it comes down to is really, in the first instance, touching hearts and minds and creating the first part of that wave towards change. And I think children's books are just such a wonderful way for us to do that and really plant those seeds. I myself, I remember reading and being so affected by books that dealt with treatment of animals. I'm thinking of books like Black Beauty, Charlotte's Web, Old Yeller. I mean, these are all books, classic books, but so powerful. They're told, for a child, but have such a compelling and amazing message that I think really will resonate. And I hope this book can, I have no images, of this becoming in the same category as a Black Beauty or something, but I would love for this book to be able to have that same ability to touch a child's heart and really make them think, make them challenge the status quo. If they can identify the feelings of Flaco as this one owl, where will that lead next? Will that make them say, well, if I care about the feelings of Flaco, the owl, what about other birds? What about, birds I see every day? What about birds that are used, in farms? What about other animals? I think that it just will plant that seed and hopefully cause children are so curious to ask more questions. And I think that can lead to a wonderful place of just unlocking doors of compassion for all animals.
Now, is this your first children's book, Christine?
It is, yes.
Yeah. Well, certainly this is not a podcast on book writing, but I'm curious, once you had the idea, how did you move forward with writing it, and how did you find a publisher? How did you get connected with your illustrator?
So I just knew I wanted to write the story. So I just kind of head down and probably wrote it in a couple days, and had the benefit of being able to bounce ideas off of family and friends. And so, you go through an editing process. And I had always probably had in the back of my head a dream that I wanted to write a children's book because they have been so impactful to me personally and, now as a mom. And so it just seemed to me this was a book that needed to be made. So I really kind of put my heart and soul into it. Once I had a draft, I needed to decide, how do I birth this into the world? And I was lucky enough to have a connection with the folks at a small publishing organization called Lantern Publishing and Media. And Lantern is a wonderful organization that publishes specifically in the area of animal welfare and veganism. And so it ended up being a wonderful fit there. And in terms of illustrations, I was talking about some of the classic books that have imprinted on my mind. So I wanted some really classic, beautiful illustrations. And again, kind of just through family, friend connections, I was able to get a recommendation from another animal advocate who happens to be a wonderful artist, Ofra Isler. And she made these gorgeous illustrations of Flaco and the other animals. And I couldn't have dreamed up better illustrations. So Thank you so much to Ofra, and thank you to my publisher, Lantern. But yeah, it's been a whole learning process. I'm, by trade, I'm an attorney. I've written tons of stuff, but never children's materials. So it's learning to use a different part of your brain, and lots of good, fun experiences along the way. Not the least of which is now meeting new people and trying to promote and the book and share the legacy of Flaco.
Good. Let's pivot to the Wild Bird Fund. Half the proceeds of the book are going to that organization. Why did you choose it? And tell us a little bit about them.
Sure. The Wild Bird Fund, it's a wonderful local organization in New York, and they exclusively focus on helping injured, orphaned, lost wildlife. And that's primarily birds, but you'll see them helping, baby squirrels, possums, other animals. And, personally, I know so many people that have had to call upon them to rescue birds that have crashed into windows or they found injured. And they're just a wonderful organization that opens up their hearts to these animals. And so they'll bring them in. Do they have their own shelter with vets that will help rehabilitate these animals? And then wherever possible, they're re-releasing these animals back into the wilds of New York City. So I think just such an important organization that really needs the support and recognition of all of us. So I was so glad to be able to donate to them. And yeah, I was going to say the other amazing part, I think, of Flaco's legacy is I think so many other organizations have really stepped up and tried to pave the way to help other urban wildlife in New York. And that's organizations like the Lights Out Coalition, and NICLAS, and others, countless individuals who have now begun lobbying what's known as Flaco's laws in New York City. And this is a package of 3 bills. One is actually already passed New York City Council. That one was to replace the use of rat poison with birth control for rats. So you'll recall that when Flaco crashed into the building, they did an autopsy on Flaco's body, and he was found to have high levels of rodenticide in his body. So that was clearly a contributing factor to his death. And as birds of prey, there are so many other owls, not Eurasian eagle owls, but barred owls. There are hawks. There are so many other birds that would share a similar fate to Flaco because of the careless use of rat poison in the city. So what an amazing success that this bill has passed, and the city will now pilot a program where they're going to replace the use of rat poison with this birth control for rats. That was one of the bills. There's 2 that are still being lobbied, and they also align with kind of Flaco's life and legacy. The second one is the use of bird-safe glass in new construction in New York City, and retrofitting old windows with decals or other things that could help make the glass visible to birds. Oftentimes they will see transparent glass and they will mistake it for air. And that's the reason for so many collisions that kill hundreds of thousands of birds in the United States. So we're really hoping that can take effect. And the last part of the package is a light pollution reduction ordinance that would require unnecessary lights to be shut down during the evening hours, because this is another contributing factor to the deaths and injury of so many wild birds as they are trying to migrate through New York City and all over. The lights can really confuse and disrupt their migration patterns, and in some instances cause the birds to get stuck in the light. If you'll recall the original 9/11 memorial where they had the giant lights that shot up, you know what I'm talking about? While that was still in use, while it was such a wonderful memorial, it's an example of how lights can really, really impact wildlife. So many birds were found to be stuck inside the spirals of light. They couldn't get out once they flew in. And so they would continue to fly in circles until they reached exhaustion, heart attack, or death. So light pollution really is kind of something that maybe people don't think about, but something that needs to be addressed. So one little owl has created such an amazing legacy, and I really hope these other two bills will continue to pass. And of course, New York City is always a leader in advancing laws that will help animal welfare. So I hope other jurisdictions will take notice of this and enact similar legislation.
No, very, very good. We know NICLAS, we did some work with them a couple of years ago when Ryder, a horse-drawn or a carriage-drawing horse, collapsed on New York City streets and then was moved to a farm and died. And we worked with them some on legislation that would replace horse-drawn carriages with battery-operated carriages. And you're nodding, so I'm assuming you're familiar with that story.
Familiar. Yes. I'm a former chair of the New York City Bar Association's Animal Law Committee. We dealt with all sorts of legislation as it relates to animals on a city level, state and federal level. But one of the ever-present issues in New York City is the horse-drawn carriage industry, where these poor horses live in high-rise apartments. Literally, their stables are high-rises. So that's where they live. They have no pasture. And then every day they're brought out into the crazy New York City streets. You can only imagine, it's hard enough to drive in New York City. Can you imagine being a horse in Midtown pulling these carts? It's just awful. And yes, year after year, there are horrible instances where these horses are getting injured. There's collisions with cars, with people. It's unsafe, and it's just inhumane. And sadly, this industry continues to exist in the city. I pay homage to the poor horse-drawn carriage or carriage horses in the book. And one of the wonderful images that Oprah made is based on a famous image where Flaco, when he first escaped the Central Park Zoo, he actually landed on the sidewalk near Bergdorf Goodman. And, one of the areas where notorious where you'll see carriage horses. And there's Flaco, there's a crate from the zoo. They're trying to tempt him with food to get back. And he just looks at it and he flies away. But there we have an image of a horse, and the horse is dreaming, of course, of freedom. And I've tried to do that in the illustrations of all the other animals. So again, this isn't just Flaco's wish to be free. This is an omnipresent wish of all animals. All animals want to be free. Bird wants to fly. Horse doesn't want to be pulling a carriage.
I thought of Ryder when I saw that illustration, and I'm heartened to know that you included it for a related reason. I'd be remiss if I did not mention, since you alluded to the barred owl, our campaign to shut down a plan by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to eliminate barred owls, killing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of them, in the Pacific Northwest, where the barred owls are range expanding into the territory of the spotted owl, which is another instance of people thinking they know better and doing something absolutely what I would consider, and our organization considers, heinous for really no good reason. And of course, we're seeing something very similar unfold in Australia now, where arguably to prevent the suffering of koalas who have lost territory to wildfires and to agriculture, just shooting them from helicopters. So I don't know. Don't get me on my soapbox, Christine.
Oh, I will. Let's both get up there. No, thank you for the work that your organization has done for those owls. I would agree. It's absolutely horrible. And it comes down to, these are animals that, have been either pushed out of their natural habitats or introduced into places by humans. This is all, problems of our own making. And for us now to come and so horribly kill and exterminate these animals, it's not right. And there has to be a better solution. It can't be that we're just going to go shoot all the owls to save some other owls. It's just nonsense.
Yeah, I'm not surprised, but I am glad you agree. Is there anything that I haven't asked that you would like to address in our conversation, Christine, before we wrap up?
Well, I think one thing that always strikes me, you see accounts to this day, the zoo will kind of berate the person who they'll blame Flaco's death on the person who freed him. And so I think we, talk for a minute about kind of the hero versus villain portrayal of the person who did that. And, to this day, we don't know who did that. And it harkens back to the question of, was Flaco better in the zoo or free, despite all the challenges there. And, as a lawyer, one of the things that strikes me in this kind of discourse is the idea that animals under the law are considered property, right? So when Flaco was freed, the person who did that could have been subject to, and still could be subject to all sorts of criminal violations, right? From state trespassing and, theft of property to federal laws dealing with, causing financial distress to businesses that profit off of animals. There's a law called the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act. So it just all boils down to the fact that still to this day, animals are still deemed property under the law. And the law just has never caught up with the fact that the property status of animals is just so antiquated and nonsensical, because how do you compare an owl or any other animal to an inanimate object, right? You simply cannot. And, to me, it demonstrates one of the ways that the law is at odds with itself. Because there are other laws that say, for example, if you see a dog in a hot car in certain states and there's nobody there to tend to that dog, you as a good Samaritan would be allowed to go break the window and rescue that dog, right? And these are the right to rescue laws. You would be freed from any sort of criminal violations. But here we have other examples of the person who freed Flaco, and that person would be subject to prosecution. Or if you look at people that have gone in and saved animals, dying animals from slaughterhouses or factory farms, they would be subject to all these laws. So it's one of those things where you just have to ask yourself how and why does the law, but also, we personally, why do we treat some animals in one way and other animals so differently?
I follow, as best I can, the activity of the Non-Human Rights Project, and a lot of their attempts, or their one big attempt recently to obtain something akin to legal personhood for, elephants, or at least an elephant. My memory is a little bit hazy on some of the details, but I do believe it's a matter of time before something akin to that recognition will be made. May not be in my lifetime or yours, perhaps in our children's, right? We both have 7-year-olds. Perhaps they will live long enough to see a day when we will begin to see some equivalence between what we have and what we deserve legally and what they don't have but do deserve legally. So we can both hope for that day.
I hope for that day. And absolutely, actually, I used to volunteer for the Non-Human Rights Project, and big admirer of the late Steve Wise. That organization has done so much good work. And the elephant you reference, an elephant named Happy, who still resides at the Bronx Zoo. She was taken from the wild as a calf from Thailand and has lived almost 50 years in captivity. And again, this is an example of just an animal who's been deprived of anything natural to her. And over the past year, actually, and this is after the court case, she has almost entirely disappeared from public view. There's all sorts of ailments with her feet and body as a result of being captive, but she's now being held in isolation. The seminal case that you mentioned, which made it up to New York's highest court, the Court of Appeals, and it was a split decision. It was a 5-3 decision. The Non-Human Rights Project filed what's known as a writ of habeas corpus, which is old-fashioned Latin for, show me a reason why this person is being held. And it's typically used when, people have been arrested and they haven't been charged yet. You have to demonstrate a legal basis for holding someone. And what the Non-Human Rights Project attempted to do was expand that definition of person to animals. And they've had some amazing, case law where they demonstrated how, person or writ of habeas corpus had been used for, such interesting things as old books or, other objects. So there really is, if you look at the case law, there is a path towards expanding it outside of what you and I think of as people. Sadly, Happy and the Non-Human Rights Project didn't prevail in that case, but with a split decision, there were some dissenting opinions written that really, signaled the path forward to, I think, one day, and perhaps it is a long time in the future, but one day we'll be able to see more legal change for animals. And I think it's part of a process where we chip away. And in my view, it takes all kinds. It takes, the children's books, the nonprofits, the local shelters, the people, protesting Burger King, at your local mall. It takes all of that to really chip away and change hearts and minds. And that's how we move towards a more just world for animals.
Well said, and we'll wrap with that. We've been talking to Christine Mott. She is the author of a book coming out soon. I'm assuming it'll be available at bookstores everywhere. Christine, are you going to be available in bookstores everywhere?
Yes, bookstores everywhere, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. If you are in the New York City area, we're doing some book signings and story times at the Greenlight Bookstore in Brooklyn, the Corner Bookshop in Manhattan. That will be the start of my book tour, and we'll hope to expand from there. But I hope everyone can pick up a copy, and half of the proceeds will be donated to the Wild Bird Fund.
Excellent. And I'll put a link to the book on Barnes & Noble in the show notes.
Thank you for listening to the Animal Wellness Podcast. Please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And follow Animal Wellness Action on Facebook, X, Instagram, and LinkedIn. To stay current with all of our news and information and to take action to help animals, sign up at animalwellnessaction.org. Until next time, remember, helping animals helps us all.